the most important piece of news out of training camp this year for fantasy players has been that and more this week on the couch. Matt Olson, first, I'm sure not last visit to the couch from 32 beat writers. You've been watching all this stuff. The fire hose is on. What has been the most important piece of news you've seen over the last month?
Honestly, I think that's a perfect segue. I think the most important piece of news is not necessarily about one player or one scenario. It's about knowing how to control that fire hose and not just keep it open the whole time. There's so much hype that comes out nonstop every day. And it's about being able to say, okay, this notification I got is meaningful. This notification is just something else. And it's I've talked about this on a couple other podcasts, and I think the biggest thing is you got to find patterns in what's happening, and that's where you guys come in. That's where hopefully 32 beat writers helps you out a little bit. But stringing together days doesn't matter if you're a rookie, a veteran, or anything in between. Is the most crucial thing when it comes to this time of year.
Yes, signal and noise. And it's not ignore everything. That's stick to your priors and ignore everything. There are going to be instances where if you had done that, you would be better off. Don't get me wrong, but we shouldn't feel free to ignore everything. But we also don't want to overreact to everything. We do want to process it and decide, is this important or is this not? And like you said, it's Cecil coined drum beat to
Mm-hmm.
capture that idea of stacking days or something building that now it passes a threshold where at the very least we have to again consider it. Maybe in the end we don't factor it into our rankings. We decide that this isn't going to be as meaningful, or there are other things on the other side of the scale that still outweigh it. But as you go through that process, um, tell me what comes to mind when you think of some things that you have decided they have built up enough, and there are some things that happened since training camp started that if you're not adjusting your rankings, if you're not adjusting your approach, then you're missing out.
Sure. Kind of just off the top of my head, the first thing that comes to mind is the Buffalo Bills offense. It's I was diving into this a little bit more, and unfortunately, I probably see it in a perfect world looking pretty similar to, and this is 100% from a fantasy standpoint. Could be as ugly as what Green Bay was last year in terms of it's Josh Allen and then a bunch of 706 guys. Um, I Kincaid I think is probably going to be one of the better tight ends out there. I don't see how he doesn't start the year off hot just because he is what he is in that offense. Um, I do think there's value in a scenario like Keon Coleman where you're seeing. I think it's been almost 6 straight days we've seen some kind of highlight reel play, and that doesn't just happen. Now, does that? It's what, and I'm stumbling a little bit on myself here, but that's kind of what you alluded to in terms of, yeah, we might see a highlight play you know, every day. Is that going to happen in a game? Is he going to do that every time? Probably not. There's probably going to be boom weeks for him and then bust weeks where he's just running those routes and getting those deep shots, which we know Josh Allen loves to throw. But those kind of guys are so tough to rank because they're 20 points one week and 3 the next. Deshaun Jackson was like that for a while. Definitely found some steadiness as he became a veteran, but then he was like a bell curve. It went right back into it.
Right.
So, we see a lot of those things, and we're seeing it more and more across offenses where, I think another good example, an oddly segue, is in Green Bay. The big drum beat for a little while was, oh, Wicks is going to be the next Green Bay wide receiver. He starts to creep up ADP wise, and then it's like someone at some point has to go, hold on, what are we doing here? How is this guy going to get more than 504 in this offense?
Right.
You know,
Yeah, I think what what I would distill what you said down to is that if you were going into the summer, we expected Buffalo and Green Bay's pass offenses to be very level. Matt LaFleur even just coming right out and saying, I hate the number one receiver. I hate that idea. They're
there
all
you
number
go.
ones. Right. Um, and and for fantasy football, we don't love that. Like you said, it's unpredictable. This is where best ball leagues come in.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we were open to, like you said, hey, Keon Coleman, the rookie talent. Uh, and Buffalo had some new faces. Curtis Samuel also reunited with Joe Brady. On the Green Bay side, eh, you are waiting to see, is there something that may change about their deployment uh, from last year? And what we've learned in both accounts is no, it's as expected. But confirmation can
Mm-hmm.
be important. But in the background of that, there is something, another drumbeat, I think, is that overall the news out of Buffalo and Green Bay has been positive on the offenses and how the
Mm-hmm.
offenses look and how they're executing. And what it means is, while it might look like at the outset a mess for fantasy, what we saw in Green Bay, for instance, over the course of the year, well, hey, Christian Watson misses time. Now all of a sudden, Jaden Reed or Romeo Dobbs becomes Dontavian Wicks. Now they're a
Mm-hmm.
more reliable play for those windows, borrowing another one from Cecil there. And the idea that if you just take one mouth to feed out, now we're talking, because it's going to be an efficient offense. You should feel positive. And also, of course, it always converges back at the quarterback, too. It's still good for Jordan Love. It is good for Josh Allen.
Mm-hmm.
But in both cases, the teams are declaring to us through the coaches, we don't have a specific player we're feeding every week. They're telling us, we're watching the offenses. That's what it looks like. We're looking at how they divvy up targets and snaps. So you can't ignore these things. And sometimes just knowing what we can feel certain about is more important than settling uncertainties, which there's always going to be a lot of those. So we start out with Keon Coleman, a rookie, which I think is interesting. And then, like you said, there's plays where we can actually see what an amazing thing, by the way. If you go back in time and you told me 25 years ago, I guess I really started doing fantasy stuff about 23 years ago. And you say, in the future, you'd have this little thing and you could be watching plays that are happening right now at training camp or within 10 seconds of when they happen from all the training camps. What a lucky group of people we are. And then we have someone like you and your colleagues there at 32 beat writers that are filtering it all. And
Mm-hmm.
we're looking for these drum beats and rookies. Tell me what you think about another rookie whose drum beat started out not even soft, but negative at the beginning of camp. But once they put the pads on and turned it on, Brian Thomas Jr. out
Yeah.
in Jacksonville. John Shipley, who's one of my favorite beat writers out
Love
there.
John.
John is an awesome dude, going all the way back. He was rubbing elbows with some Eric Stoner and company way back when, and now he's an outstanding beat writer for the Jags. And he was very straightforward about, hey, early on, Ronald Darby was really blanketing him, which, hey,
Mm-hmm.
welcome to the league, right? But since it has been full speed, and I believe Tampa, they're doing their joint practices. That's another thing that's been awesome, by the way, is all of the teams, and the teams have said we get more out of joint practices than we do out of our own practices, or even sometimes out of preseason games. And Brian Thomas is continually burning, including, I think, Zion McCallum, who runs like a 4.33. Just they
Mm-hmm.
can't run with him. The Tampa corners cannot run with him. And every day, I'm sorry, he's making a play. How much is Brian Thomas Jr. registering on your radar?
I mean, to your point, he's definitely come on strong the last 2 weeks. The joint practices have helped a ton in, I think, getting him more comfortable with his routes and kind of what Jacksonville and honestly what Trevor Lawrence expects him to be able to do. In that same breath, we've also seen Gabe Davis come on pretty strong over
Mm-hmm.
the last week. Um, I hate to allude this at all back to what, we were talking about previously, but again, there's a lot of Mo's to feed in this offense. But I will tell you, Brian Thomas is stringing together days. He has looked great. And Shipley said exactly what the same vibe that you were on. It was a really rough start to camp. We've seen that with another rookie in AD Mitchell, who I'm imagining will come up as we move along through here. Um, but man, the guy's making the most of it, and he's going to be on the field. We've seen rumblings that he might be, the guy for two wide receiver sets in some
Mm-hmm.
cases. I can definitely see Jacksonville switching those set, like anytime they're in two wide receiver sets, switching stuff up and getting guys on the field. But I mean, to even be in that conversation after the start of camp to where we are now, it's a tremendous speaks volumes for Brian Thomas.
Yes, it is the change. It's the change in tenor and tone
Mm-hmm.
that is really meaningful here. And this isn't necessarily a case like Puka Nakua, where going all the way back to the spring, you heard the drum beat, but you're seeing it in a potentially transformative addition. How many plays last year did we see Calvin Ridley almost make the play? Almost make the play. And with that little bit of extra speed, a little bit of extra size that Brian Thomas has, that could really unlock the deep passing game. And you mentioned Gabe Davis, and Gabe Davis is playing a little different role. He's doing more crossers and
Mm-hmm.
more underneath stuff that wasn't necessarily on his plate with Buffalo. They still have Evan Ingram. I think that Christian Kirk has a soft tissue, like minor injury right now, so we'll watch that. But like you said, two wide receiver sets has not been when Christian Kirk has been on the field and hasn't been in the past. And Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis are giving the Jags a good
Mm-hmm.
reason to not change that. And maybe Trevor Lawrence, if the deep passing comes online, we could see some advancing from the Jags. And you mentioned AD Mitchell too. And what's really interesting about what's going on with Mitchell is that it seems like camp battles, right? If you're watching the camp previews, you're reading up. Alec Pierce and AD Mitchell was one of the. It was a camp battle that people were really looking forward to, even the Colts themselves. And in
Mm-hmm.
an ideal situation, Matt, competition is going to bring out the best in both players, right? It sure seems like that's what's happening in Indianapolis with these receivers.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I will say, and I hate to even really bring this in, but Josh Downs going
Oh,
down for a little bit, obviously opens up the door for opportunity elsewhere. And honestly, Mitchell has capitalized on pretty much everything over the last week. Um, to the point where, you're seeing Richardson look for him more regularly. He's been in the slot. He's gone in other, positions as well, but it's been interesting that they've moved him around a little, which I do like to see. Um, and the I'm going to steal your guy's drum beat has
yes.
been, that he is pushing Alec Pierce not out of the way because Pierce is still having fine days himself, but it's making it a true battle where 2 weeks ago,
Mm-hmm.
even we were saying, oh man, Pierce is going to be the guy. Mitchell's going to be buried. Then that Downs thing happens. Then he starts playing up. And now we're at a completely different narrative, which, you know, he's strung together days. He looks good. Pittman praised him recently about his
Yeah.
release, which, I
Yes,
mean,
he said. Can I let me interject? He said I'm studying his releases. Michael Pittman said that about AD Mitchell. So yeah, that's one of those things that I had Coach Speak. I had Greg from Coach Speak Index on, and y'all. And just as a quick aside, Coach Speak Index and 32 B writers, they're just so essential right now.
mhm.
The pulse of what's going on, what y'all are doing, and he does the coach speak, and I feel like there should be a player speak index because another part, and you all do a good job making sure to include these things. But yeah, when coaches say things, obviously they are the decision makers. That's your authority figures on these teams. But when a player says something, when a teammate says something, or an opponent in these joint practices says something, especially about a rookie, we should take notice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you you want or you see a lot of the times the veterans being slightly hotter on rookies. So anytime praise does come out, I do take it seriously. I mean, it is almost the to your point, the ultimate player speak or however you want to rationalize it or chalk it up. But you don't get a lot of those compliments in the media, and I do think there's value there. You also have people like Patrick Mahomes who just praises everyone
Yeah.
nonstop. The guy could drop
Yeah.
4 passes. Oh, he had a great day.
Yeah, yeah, we still believe in him, even though Sky Moore's going to get cut. Uh, so, and bringing this back to coach speak and player speak, I think is good too, because again, I mean, what y'all are doing at 32 beat writers that's so important is being a filter, not this fire hose, turning the fire hose into a nice watering can to help your garden grow, and not inundating it and not flooding it, because not everything that comes out is meaningful. You have to have context, like you said, context for who's speaking. That's important,
Mhm.
and that gives you a context to interpret. If they are they usually gushing like Pete Carroll loved everybody. Like no matter what, Pete Carroll was always going to be positive. So you're always taking these things in context, and you're taking them in context, like you already mentioned, of what has been happening. So what's the momentum here? What we're drawing this trend on a plot line? What's the trend here? Is this continuing the trend? Is it accelerating or decelerating the trend? And you're really trying to meaningfully sort out information, signal from noise, but the handle's 32 beat writers. So what I like about this, we already mentioned John Shipley. There's a nod there to the people that are our eyes and ears at these practices, at these press conferences, listening with their sources, hearing things that they can't necessarily tell us, but they
Mhm.
can show us through the way they talk about things, what they know that they can't say. I say this because Cecil's been covering the Broncos forever, and I hate to do this, but I mean, there's the best things he hears are things he could never say publicly, or he'll never get that information again.
Right.
It's just that
He
simple,
gets
right?
Yep.
So y'all are learning the beat writers. And much like you said, Patrick Mahomes is always positive. Sometimes there are beat writers that they're not afraid to mix their football takes in, and you learn to take the football take part of it from with a grain of salt, but the information is still good. Or there are beat writers at the other end of the spectrum where really they try to be super just the facts, ma'am, objective. So when they say, "Hey, this guy looks like a different player than who we saw in camp last year," you pay a lot closer attention. Give me an example for a beat writer that you kind of feel like you've gotten to know through digesting and processing everything they put out there, and how it's helped you figure out what's the signal and what's the noise in what they're reporting.
For sure. I mean, one of the top ones that comes to mind to me is Matt Derrick, who covers the Kansas City Chiefs. He's pretty dialed in. I mean, the guy's talking about he's going to, practice daily. Now, I will say a slight disclaimer here is that the Chiefs are a very open team. Chiefs and the Patriots are probably the two most open teams when it comes to what beat writers are allowed to say, do, so on and so forth. Um, but Matt does a good job of telling you what you want to know just quickly and easily. And another great beat writer that covers Kansas City is Pete Sweeney. So
Yeah,
what we like to do is, and this is like the most high level surface example ever, but if Matt says something and Pete says something and they align, then it's probably true.
right.
So it's almost like when you're listening to coach speak to a degree. Okay, there's one guy, so it's tough to be like, oh, is this guy telling the truth that he's not? With the beat writers, we're actually, I don't want to say vetting because that's not the right word, but we're watching what each of them say. We're trying to find patterns in that align
Mhm.
with patterns in the player to then bring you the news that actually matters. Um, and to your point, I'm not going to name names, but there's guys we won't we won't even consider
Right.
touching. It's just it's part of the learning curve of knowing who you can trust and who you can't. And to your point, we try and filter that. And I think it
Mhm.
does lead to those patterns coming up and making things a lot easier to see.
Yeah, you mentioned the when the beat writers agree, especially when there's longtime beat writers. I feel like San Francisco is one of those teams with the Mats, with the Matt Barrows and Matt Mayoko.
Mm-hmm.
If the Mats agree, then you know you're onto something. So we got to go there. And I know this has been quite a fun house or a house of horrors, but you all have probably been closer than anybody else to all of the ups and downs of the Brandon Ayuk news cycle. And I feel like a lot of people are saying, I'm just ignoring all of it until there's something official, and they're looking smarter and smarter. Although there was a change, another major change in tenor, and I'll bring up Matt Mayoko again because he was the one, and he's been covering the team as long as I can remember, at least like 15 years.
Mm.
And he said there has been a change. He knows what and Matt Mayoko is not one to get put out there, you know, spectacular, sensationalized takes on things. He's a very professional about the way he does his job. So when he said that, I took notice, but yet it seems like we're kind of right back where we started through the lens of doing what y'all do at 32 Beat Writers. What do you feel like you've learned or maybe wish you could unlearn about following this Brandon Aiyuk saga?
Honestly, I think one thing, this is AU completely aside, I think it's put, at least in the short term, more focus on who San Francisco currently has in house, and oddly enough, who Pittsburgh currently has in house. So I think we've dialed in a lot more on those players and those receivers. If I think you hit the nail on the head. This thing's a mess. You hear one thing one day, you hear something the next day. He's close with San Francisco. He doesn't want to agree with San Francisco. He wants to go to Pitt. It's just there's someone who out there who knows. I think there's a current Twitter battle going on
Yes.
between two people currently. I don't need to drag those names in
Right.
unless we want to go down that path, but it's just that shows you the true feelings around it. It just things like this are personally I like to sit on the sidelines for
Mhm.
kind of what you said. But like I said, it has given us opportunity to really dial in on fits, schemes, needs, and player development with both those teams.
Yeah, it's so difficult to interpret with any kind of certainty what has made it up to the surface. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, y'all are 32 beat writers, so it makes sense that we would talk about this layer, which is very fluid, and sometimes it's clear like a window that we can see through, and sometimes it obfuscates everything and makes it even harder to see because we're trying to remove this filter, this lens of how one of the things I'm fond of saying, Matt, is for the most part in the NFL, no information makes it up to the surface where we see it or hear it unless it's meant to. Very, very, somebody is intentionally putting it out there,
Mm-hmm.
and it's managed. And some of it is outright falsehoods. Some of it is massaged information or information that's put out there to achieve a certain end that's based on something true, but maybe isn't not being presented in the most objective light. And sometimes it really is just like you said, there are some organizations we can say are open. There's some organizations and some coaches, and again, this is some of the great work that Greg is doing over there at Coach Speak Index. We're saying, no, this coach tells the truth. When this coach talks
Mm-hmm.
about this subject, especially injuries or roster decisions, or whatever, over the course of years we've seen, they do tell the truth. But in this Brandon Ike situation, if you're trying to come up with a unified theory of what's been going on, it's almost like, I mean, we all are in families or grew up in families. Most families, mom and dad would fight. I don't want to start revealing too much about my past and really put myself on the couch here, but most of the time that's behind closed doors, right? Even if
Mm-hmm.
you're the kids and you can hear it through the wall, you're like, oh, mom and dad are fighting. What's going on? But in this case, it's almost like mom and dad are fighting, and they're using like the newspapers to put their arguments out there, and the bigger question becomes, has the fight been so rough that now there's not going to be that reconciliation, even though we're just trying to get something out of the other, right? Like Brandon
Mm-hmm.
Ayuk, we just want San Francisco, to acknowledge his value. And San Francisco wants Brandon Ayuk to say, hey, you just need to be reasonable about what your value is, and can we just and has that relationship been damaged by this? Has it really just been a mating dance where San Francisco using other players to show Ayuk, hey, this is what your actual worth is? Was Ayuk using the trade interest to motivate San Francisco to come up with their offer? We'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's been a really interesting study, even though for some people it's been torture to see it continually change, vacillate, flapping in the wind. And is there a name in the NFL national media that hasn't been implicated in this, right? I mean, every single name, if you go over the last couple of weeks, has given Tom Pelissero, Mike Garafolo, Adam Schefter, whoever. They've all weighed in at different times to say, well, this is what I think is going on. This is what I'm hearing. This is where it's at. And in the end, we're kind of like a dog chasing its tail. And at least at this moment, well, I mean, at this moment, I shouldn't even say that because by the time people are hearing this moment has already passed. But we'll see what happens with this Brandon Aiyuk situation. It's trending back to him staying with San Francisco, maybe even on a long-term deal. But I'd like the y'all are sorting all this stuff out for us. Let's just go back to some more stuff that's been happening. Give me an example again, because y'all are doing this. What's really fun is you don't keep it behind the veil that you're fantasy football players, right? That
No, not at all.
you got skin in the game. Like you're just like the rest of us. You're watching this stuff, and your heart is sinking, or your heart's starting to beat fast and get excited. This is what I was envisioning. It's all coming together. So you're not just doing this in a cold, unemotional way. So you might be in, boy, I know this feeling. Like you're there doing your social media presence, and at the same time, like, oh, I have to go see if this player's on the waiver wire. I'm going to go throw a trade offer for this player. I'm going to try to trade this player now before this gets out there. So give me another example of something while you're running 32 beat writers this summer that you're passing it on to your people, but you're also wondering, what do I need to do for myself?
I mean, the first one that I can think of that like instantly jumped out when you started that was I remember running and picking up Jordan Whittington from my taxi.
Oh, yeah.
We had a podcast with Jordan Rodrigue, who from the Athletic, who is also one of the best out there. I mean, her coverage of the Rams is second to none. And sure enough, we had started to see a little bit of it in camp, and then she confirmed it, and I was like, I'm just gonna go over here and click a couple buttons, and okay, now I'll go back to typing up this summary over here, and it is. I've toyed with it both ways. Like, do I just try and get the emotion out and not play fantasy football? And then I'm like, but what good does that do me?
Right.
I do think having, to your point, skin in the game makes things, you take ownership a little that way, which I like to think we do in general. Like if we're publishing something, even if it's simply a retweet, like it's still, we're saying it's worth something, which hopefully people understand that it's not just a couple guys over here button smashing on Twitter. Right. And, but there are scenarios like Jordan, who come up. There's been a couple, I'm sure the guys at 32 are going to laugh when I say this, but like Ray McLeod popped onto the radar, and he was getting this is when Rondell Moore was healthy, and he was getting the reps ahead of him in the slot. And, the whole thing was, it's going to be a competition. Sadly, Moore is now out for the season, and Ray McLeod, as of today, is probably the starting slot receiver for the Atlanta Falcons. That's not a terrible, addition to your bench. So we do see scenarios like that where it's just like, yeah, if I didn't have that info and if I didn't watch and I wasn't constantly engaged with this, I'd probably miss on Ray McLeod, and he would just be some jag on the bench where he actually could produce this year.
Right. It's context. It might not mean you're going to draft somebody. Jordan Whittington is another good example. In redraft leagues, in your typical league, you're not drafting Jordan Whittington. You're not drafting Ray McLeod. But if an injury thrusts them into the spotlight, or if it's one of those situations where McLeod comes out week one with Kirk Cousins as the full-time number 3 receiver. Remember, Zach Robinson coming from the Sean McVay school, that's going to be a 3 wide receiver offense. Atlanta opens up with the Pittsburgh Steelers. That'll be interesting. Those teams usually play epic games. I think there was an amazing overtime game about 20 years ago with Michael Vick in Heinz Field. I think so. Anyway, my point is, we'll see what happens in that week one matchup, but it's week two, that week two waiver wire. It's a way for you to know, hey, is this real? Is there something here with someone like Ray McLeod? Let's say if Jordan Whittington gets on the field ahead of Demarcus Robinson, and in small opportunities does things. Now he becomes a preemptive pickup because we
Mm-hmm.
saw what this Rams offense can do with rookie receivers. And Whittington, I want to go back and highlight that quickly because, again, you mentioned Jordan Rodriguez, who's one of the things that she does so well is she knows we're all listening and hanging on every word, every beat writer. We are hanging on every
Yep.
word of every, like you said, there might be a few beat writers we won't name names that will say, well, that's nice. We'll pat them on the head. Thanks for doing your job. And we're not necessarily hanging on every word that they say, but the beat writers have evolved. And I love Matt to come back to, again, when Cecil and I started the Audible, we started doing interviews with beat writers,
Mm-hmm.
some legends. Vito Stellino, I remember. Killer Kowalski, rest in peace, I think was the first beat writer that we interviewed. I remember when we finally got to interview Ed Bouchette. That was a big deal for me. I mean, I grew up reading Ed Bouchette. I grew up reading Jerry Dulac too.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm 49. Uh, and we never said the term fantasy football. We made sure to not say fantasy football. I think people could tell which questions we were asking that were really specifically trying to get some information for fantasy football. Uh, it was, like I say, the children's table. Fantasy football was the children's table in football media. And now it has, I don't want to say evolved because that's self-serving, but it has changed so that at the very least, I think every beat writer has to understand and be conversant about fantasy football and understand that a big part of their audience is going to be parsing
Mm-hmm.
what they're saying through a fantasy football lens. And Jordan always does a terrific job understanding that her audience is going to be doing that and serving up her information with that in mind. And again, walking that fine line, because you mentioned something that I think is changing y'all's job. Because I don't remember exactly what year 32 beat writers first popped on the scene, but it has changed even in the time that 32 beat writers have been around, that teams are being very strict about what can be reported, about
Mm-hmm.
what can be recorded. And I can tell you just from behind the scenes talks with Cecil that yes, the beat writers, there are repercussions. These aren't just guidelines or suggestions. These are rules that are supposed to be followed. And if you're not following them, you find out really quickly. So they all have to say and tell us, knowing that we're tell us, but also knowing the team is looking and reading what they're saying and saying you broke the rules. Now you're
Mm-hmm.
going to get not just a slap on the wrist, but something that is not going to be good for you professionally. And she walks that fine line so well and gives us that meaningful information. But before she said anything about Whittington, I want to say Charles Robinson had early on in camp, who is another guy I trust as among the national people. Man, do I trust Charles Robinson. I mean, he's just one notch below like Jay Glazer in terms of if
Mm-hmm.
he says something, I'm going to take it, not just take it on faith, but I know from his past record that that's actionable information. And I can't remember who else brought up Jordan Whittington, but before his first preseason game, there were already at least two definitive voices saying they love him, they think he's capable of a lot, and not just a lot as a backup to Cooper Kupp, but a versatile player, more like in a Debo Samuel mold. That they had seen
Mm-hmm.
some of that, and maybe that you just put him in their long-term plans. And the way he played in the first preseason game, you're already hearing talk that maybe he's not even going to play in the preseason. Uh, so this is a player that, now that you know the backstory, even though you might not draft Jordan Whittington, if there's even a crack in the door for him, to push that door open. Same thing with Atlanta. It's funny. I feel like the theme of our show, Matt, is pass offenses we like. We're not exactly sure how it's going to shake out, but we keep talking about these pass offenses that we're really optimistic about and saying, hey, the first couple weeks of the season is going to sort of like Atlanta, could be Darnell Mooney,
Mm-hmm.
certainly Atlanta's pass offense. You mentioned Ray McLeod. Atlanta's pass offense, if we're looking to Minnesota, Kirk Cousins was able to support Justin Jefferson to the tune of elite production, and last year Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson. So you can say, okay, Kyle Pitts, Drake London, who's the third? I mean, maybe it's Bijan Robinson. There's more passing production there than we're accounting for if we're just
Mm-hmm.
putting chips on Pitts and on London. So I like that though, and I want to revisit something. So the code is a solemn, important topic, Matt. So because I struggle with the code, if I'm going to write an article, if I'm going to put something out there, and I go preemptively make the move, then is that fair to my league mates? But you say you'll stop and in the middle of the post go and make the pickup and then post it.
I mean, Someone's got to do it, right?
No, no. Hey, this is I understand. I know, and I mean, okay, there may have been some times. There is a line that I'll say, "Nope, I am actually gonna wait until after I make this pick in a draft." And then I'll put out there that Jack Campbell to IDP leagues has the green dot or something like that. So it's just, all of these the ethics and morals of fantasy football and the codes that we live by. And again, it makes it fun. And I think that you all do a really good job indicating that you are fantasy players and you are also reacting emotionally and analytically to this news,
Mm-hmm.
but not so much in a way that it skews what you're actually posting, or you're just there to prove that you were right about something, because we all realize how wrong we were over and over again. um so before we came on the show, you mentioned that, from the middle of July to September 1st, basically you're AWOL, and your wife knows that, and it's just you're going to be underwater with training camp, with the preseason. How does it change when after September 1st? How you experience football?
I think, a big part of it is just seeing, it's going back and checking yourself. You know, was what we put out accurate to what's happening on the football field? So it's not so much we pack up the bags and fly to Florida kind of deal. It's more of a, okay, let's start to, look at ourselves and reflect a little. And it's kind of been a scenario where we we started doing more stuff come January and looking at draft picks and whatnot and following them. I'm going slightly off topic here, but I'll come
Yeah, please.
back. And I pulled up our Whittington player page just to see when the first day was that there was something that we saw about this guy that mattered, and it was May 23rd of this year.
Yeah.
So, to kind of look at that, it's maybe things do start a little sooner, and then Christmas is from middle of July until September 1st. But again, to go full circle, it's more about saying, hey, okay, we own it. We've owned it
Yeah.
year after year. We were right on this guy. We were wrong on this guy. We were wrong on Tank Bigsby last year. I'm going to try again this year because the reports are pretty damn good. But
Hmm.
um, there's nothing wrong with being wrong, and I think that's a huge part of fantasy football is that, there's tons of us out here trying to help the mass. At the end of the day, unfortunately, the beat writers, me, you, we're all human. We're gonna make mistakes, but man, we're gonna give it every effort to give you all the best info that we can, so you can make a calculated, intelligent decision. And it's I almost feel like that first 4 weeks of the season really does dictate what your off season was. I made the joke that, the in season is our off season. And we're gonna try and get better about that and keep things flowing and keep content coming and all that. For sure. But it's not as fun for a beat writer to come on week 4 and be like, well, you saw what I saw.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it definitely is a time where we can look back, say, hey, this guy, and more importantly, why? I think something that we've really tried to do as a team is look back and sometimes even to the point of typing it out and being like, what do we do right here? What do we do wrong here? What beat writers were connected to this? And being able to track it now has been game changing for us. This is the first year where we actually have a system to say, this came from this came from this came from this. Let's go back and look whose takes were accurate, whose takes weren't, put it together, because if it's on our page, we agree with it. At
Hmm.
some point, we said that is a legitimate fact that we feel
Right.
is important to the community. So we only get better as the whole community gets better. And we want to just make sure we're checking ourselves, because I think that's how you put a good product out.
And how you learn to refine your process for the following year. Because I
Mm-hmm.
like the idea that you're getting at, which is now when you watch football during the regular season, you're thinking about what happens in terms of, well, what were the preseason, offseason stories around this situation? Were they foreshadowing? Were they indicators? Or were they red herrings? Were they dead ends? And actually, it ends up that, sure, Brian Thomas can run in joint practices, but once he's actually in the game, where he's having to deal with more bump and run coverage or whatever, he still has a lot to learn versus, oh, there you go, first game of the season. There goes Michael Thomas. I'm sorry, Michael Thomas. Brian Thomas. Michael Thomas still waiting for someone to give him that call. Brian Thomas, streaking down the sidelines against Miami's corners. And we have a shootout down in Florida. And Brian Thomas, boy, I hope you drafted him because he had 2 touchdowns and 150 yards on 3 catches. And we're looking back, and I love that you said there's nothing wrong with being wrong. What I like to say, Matt, is if you're not leaving yourself open to look very wrong, then you're not saying anything meaningful. How can you even say anything interesting if there's not about football? Because the phrase I've always used is we're peeking through keyholes as fantasy football players, as fans. And the beat writers are not peeking through keyholes, but they can only confirm stuff that they know we can see through the keyhole. So and you, like you said, you tease it out where now y'all are being very systematic, very rigorous about recording these things in a way that allows you to see track records and trends. And you mentioned facts because I think there's some different things we can tease out. There's facts, like actual facts, injuries, or this play went for a touchdown. And then there's something a little bit softer than a fact, but it's like a objective observation. This player's faster than he was last year, or this player, the game is slowing down for him, or something like that. But then there's just opinion. Then there's just beat writers saying, hey, sometimes they even just say directly, if you play fantasy football, you should care about this. The coaches will say that too. Or they'll say, I think this player's gonna have a breakout year. I mean, they'll predicate it as an opinion. And then we can, like you said, well, geez, some beat writers we know, I don't want to say they don't know ball, but if they have an opinion, that's great, and they might be right because clock stopped clock and all that. But there are other beat writers, like a Mike Reese, I think is a good example, that he very rarely goes off into opinions or otherwise uses it as a place to be a football pundit. So if Mike Reese says something a little bit outside the lines, I'm going to pay more attention to that. But we can track that over time. And I think, like you said, we're human beings. We're going to make mistakes, and we're talking about human beings. And it's never decided in advance. There's always something that where the person at the center of the situation can still have a say and influence the outcome. Like you mentioned, Tank Bigsby, and it has been a rerun. It was so positive. Everything was positive, and everything about the team wanting to use him was positive last year. And sure enough, here's where the 32 beat writers, where the coach speak was correct. To open the season, he had an important role. He was in goal line. He was in important situations. And then what had happened? He kept malfunctioning. It was not going well to the point where we saw a lot more Dearness Johnson. Now they're saying he's ready. He looks like in the background. Here's Travis Etienne saying, "I know they don't want me to have as much work as they did last year. I know they don't want to work me that hard." Is it still just aspirational? Is Doug Peterson the kind of guy that, like, his team's going to be positive to talk a guy up whose confidence needs a boost, or is it real?
I mean, my thing is they've gotten Tank more involved doing more things and more reps than they did last year. I think that was my biggest takeaway is, yeah, he was doing it in camp, but he wasn't doing it as frequently as he's doing now.
Yeah.
I like to think Peterson has evolved in that way and saw the writing on the wall with him that, hey, if Tank's going to be successful, we have to do X, Y, Z. To go to your point, yeah, is he going to cut into Travis's workload? Yeah, probably a little. There's no doubt. But at the same time, Etienne's been given a lot of work as a receiving back in training camp, and that is a trend. That is something we have seen week after week. So I do see maybe him picking up some of what he loses on the ground through the air this year, which could be interesting and could provide a nice balance with him. But I mean, I'll stake the claim right now. I'm in on Tank Bigsby.
Sure. Yeah. Well, aren't that many? The reality is there aren't that many running back so we can see their team regards them as a clear backup. When you get to that later part of your draft, and there are some rookies, I think Ray Davis has probably earned that at this point. Bucky Irving has probably earned that at this point. Damian Pierce, uh, I think Jordan Mason is getting close to earning that. That's a really interesting guy. Give me what's your
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Mason take after watching the last month of news about the 49ers backfield. What's your Jordan Mason take?
My Jordan Mason take is that if I'm a betting man, he's going to be the RB2 on that depth chart. I wouldn't be shocked if Mitchell is not in San Francisco this year. That's probably the hottest take that I could ever give you right now.
Uh huh.
um, but Jordan Mason has not done a lot wrong. You know, they trust him. He's worked on his pass catching. Clearly, he went out and bought some drug machines. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, and maybe if I do that, I could be an NFL receiver. I'm not quite sure, but he's doing what he can inside and outside of the building to show San Francisco that he can be a guy they can rely on. And we've seen tragedy in that 49ers backfield year after year. I feel like it's literally a plague.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously CMC is who he is and is going to do what he does. But man, we've seen guy after guy get hurt, go down, this, that, the other thing. Um, am I in on Jordan Mason? Yeah, I like what I've seen so
Yeah.
far. Everything's been positive. It's come from multiple sources. I think he's got a great shot to be that RB2 when the season starts.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I think he should be in people's late round draft plan at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And it also beat writer reports about Jordan Mason. And again, it wasn't purely objective fact. I think one of the beat writer reports was he was one of the offensive MVPs or one of the standout players. So that's a qualitative report. But I think it might have been Nick Wagner. Don't quote me on that. But it was not a 49ers beat writer that we decide to ignore. I'll say that.
Mm-hmm.
And Jordan Mason earning that, and this it's not sexy, but it's okay because this is where the edges you can get by paying close attention in August are your late round picks,
Mm-hmm.
backup running back situations, things that make you more ready to act with conviction in those first few waiver wire runs where you're looking at situations and you're up on these situations so there's a fork in the road and maybe you're putting your chips on one of those two sides of the fork, but you can watch in week 1, week 2, say, well, I was wrong. And I was liking it to Matt that it's the offensive lineman who gives up the sack that is ready to recover the quarterback fumble. So if you're paying
Mm-hmm.
close attention, you were wrong. Maybe just wait. It still might be good in the long run because you're the one ready to act quickly on that waiver wire information where others are still feeling undecided. So now enough football. We go off the rails always for the last 10 minutes or so. So I'll start here, Matt. Um, if you weren't obsessing about football right now and sharing that with all of us in the football community, what's something else you might be doing as your bargain with society and civilization so you can exist?
Got a bargain every day.
Yeah.
No, honestly, it's probably taking the dogs and the wife, getting out on the lake here in Nashville.
Oh, right
Um,
on.
it's a Nashville's a love hate city. We've been here about 2.5 years now. I don't ever see myself leaving. It's treated us so well. Um, but just getting outdoors, man, and whether that is a practice or a game or just man, me and my wife found ourselves just watching some intramural flag football the other day in Centennial Park, like
Hmm.
being able to do stuff like that and just enjoy the presence of people and competition is always fun.
Yeah, Nashville's different. Nashville's really different. It's all part of the new South, right? Austin, don't even
Yep.
get me started.
Oh,
I spent 20 years in Austin. Don't even get me
okay.
started on how Austin has changed. But Nashville, because I can remember passing through Nashville 20, 25 years ago, and it's
Mm,
practically unrecognizable. But I will say this is off the rails. Probably the best farmers market. New Orleans farmers markets are incredible. One of the best things about living in New Orleans is the farmers market. But probably the best farmers market I've been to, Matt, is in Franklin, Tennessee.
okay.
I highly recommend. I think that the Murfreesboro farmers market has a lot of the same vendors.
Okay.
It was really, really amazing. A ton of people who just loved what they were doing and sharing it with the world, much like 32 beat writers, much like the
There you
Audible, much like
go.
football guys. There was this guy who was like grew up in Alaska and learned from Eskimos how to make like this smoked trout. There
It's
was
amazing.
yeah, right. There's this nice young man who made like dog like turned antlers. You get the antlers from different like deer processing places and turn it
Mm-hmm.
into dog treats, like which is like I guess is like a really good thing for dogs, dental health, and just a bunch of things like that. They found one thing that they really love to do and they love to share it. And maybe that's I think someone quoted me once. I said something like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow isn't a pot of gold, it's a pot of content. You're
Mm-hmm.
content. The book Siddhartha has the ferryman, like the main character realizes like, oh, just finding your place in the world and doing what you do, like that's actually the thing, not the search, not the quest, not the thing at the end, but it's just that every day you're doing something and contributing to the world and sharing something that you love to do. Okay, so you said Nashville 2.5 years. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I have a guess of where you were raised or where you were born and bred, but what are some of the places like where did the journey start? Ended up at least as of now in Nashville.
I mean, the journey's insane. It's my southern accent just sometimes takes over and I can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
But yes, the journey started in a small town called Boston, Massachusetts. And man, it's been wild. I went from Boston to New York, lived in New York for a couple of years, then went to Cincinnati,
Oh
Ohio.
wow,
Met my wife in Cincinnati 11 years ago now, which is even saying that out loud is wild.
it's great.
Um, then from there, went to Miami, spent some time in Miami, then kicked it back north up to Pittsburgh for a little
Yeah,
bit, and then tucked it over to Nashville, where we currently. I think I'm done moving. I don't know. I don't think I need me
right.
anymore.
That's enough,
Um,
right?
but man, you want to talk about being able to see incredible cultures and just experiencing them, and we've gotten so good about trying to be a local even though you
Yeah,
aren't a local and just
sure.
supporting whatever is local while you're there.
Yes.
I think it's so important. I know, obviously at the end of the day football is what we do and love, but man, I there's so many good people doing good things
Yeah.
that need to be recognized and supported, that sometimes this wonderful little game of football allows us to reach out and do
Hmm.
those things and just just be part of the community. And I think that gets so overlooked in 2024 sometimes, that it's it's sad, and especially in massive transient cities. I go to New Orleans a ton. um Honestly, every 8 weeks I'm normally in New Orleans. So
Oh, holler at me.
yeah, I basically travel the entire southeast for my day job, which shockingly, this might be sound crazy, is not fantasy football related. um, but it does allow me to explore and just meet a tremendous amount of great people doing great things. And there needs to be a little bit more of that going on.
Yeah, we like people. In New Orleans, we like people. In New Orleans, we really
It's
like people.
awesome.
We like any opportunity to interact with someone. I think it reflects like namaste in the universe in me honors the universe in you.
Hmm.
Every time there's an interaction, there's no interaction that is trivial. There's no interaction that is a throwaway interaction. And like you said, it's valuing other people. It's valuing what other people do, their presence, the moment. And man, you've been to some interesting places too, because Miami, much like New Orleans, does not really belong to the United States. New Orleans belongs more to the Caribbean and a little bit to Africa. Miami is even South America, Caribbean also, but Miami
Yeah.
is in the circulatory system of a lot of the world in the Western Hemisphere. You mentioned Cincinnati. Cincinnati's kind of like New Orleans in so much as there was a time that Cincinnati was, I think, in the top 5 in population in the United
Yeah, it
States.
was
In the eight,
Porkopolis.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was 1800s. It was an
Hmm.
extremely important city in the United States. And now you see a lot of great old architecture, and there is a lot of tradition and culture there, but it's more of a preservation effort than what's happening now. Although Cincinnati has done a lot better at staying contemporary than New Orleans has. but that's kind of by design. New Orleans is stuck in the past on purpose. But you mentioned going from Boston to New York, like the city. I went to Syracuse, so I'm familiar
Okay.
with the whole seaboard. So I just got to know, because that rivalry, you could say there's. I'm going to make a lot of Philadelphia people mad when I say this. I think Philadelphia is a great
That's
city. I love
okay.
Philadelphia. But Philadelphia doesn't really have that rivalry. And we can say there's sports rivalries between Philadelphia and New York, but I think that Boston and New York, the sports rivalry, it's kind of like Texas and Texas A&M. The sports rivalry is really point you in the larger direction of just animosity between the cities. So how was it growing up in Boston and then moving to New York, and obviously being someone from Boston?
So this is we might need to edit this out after, because I
Okay.
can't believe I'm gonna go on record saying this. So when I started playing baseball, I was 6 years old, and it was a co-ed team. Just my dad was like, "Hey, I'm gonna coach it." He's one of those dads that just always wants to be involved in that kind of stuff. I can't thank him enough for it. So we get our t-ball team, right? Keep in mind, we're 10 miles outside of downtown Boston.
Yeah.
I'll give you one guess what team we get.
Oh no.
So
You're
we
the
get
Yankees?
the New York Yankees, right? And it's a stupid T-ball T-shirt with just like a Yankees logo right here, right? So again, I'm 5, maybe 6 years old, somewhere in that range. I know what sports are. I don't really understand. So God bless my mom. She decides, well, we're just going to torment your father. So she's like, if a game was on, she would be like, go put your baseball uniform on and go cheer with your dad. And I would wear this Yankees shirt and just sit there screaming at my poor father. It got so crazy that I grew up a New York Yankees fan. Yeah. So I didn't eat a lot of dinner as a child.
Wow.
And to this day, I'm a huge Yankees fan. Now I eat, live, and breathe Celtics, Bruins, Patriots. It's just I'm telling you, it's like psychological warfare on my mother's behalf that
Yeah.
just turned me into a Yankees fan. And I remember in 1996, I was 8 years old. Tino Martinez, I think he hit 56 home runs that year, probably juiced out of his mind.
Right.
But he became my absolute favorite player. I mean, I named my ferret after him that my parents
Wow.
got me. You know
Right.
what I
That's a
mean?
great 90s story, because if
Dude,
it's a ferret, it only would have been in the 90s.
that's
And
true.
you got to root for the good Yankees teams. You got to root for the Yankees teams that were built the old-fashioned way, with glue guys like Leyritz and Scott Brocious, and
Yep.
players Paul O'Neill. And then Steinbrenner decided to try to buy the very best team. And then they didn't have won a World Series. They didn't win a World Series with Musina and Giambi and all those guys. And I thought that was Soriano. I thought that was so the baseball gods. It would dangle this right there. Even Aaron Boone right there.
Yep.
No, none for you, because you have to build. The baseball gods are going to reward building a team the right way. They're glue guys. It's not just about getting the best players. But I don't know what to say. I mean, I'll tell. I got it. I'll indulge me. There's a great story here about me and my stepson Noah, because we went to see Miguel Cabrera. We got tickets. He was at 2,999 hits up in Detroit, and we were going to get to see his 3,000th hit. I just knew it. And in the 8th inning, I think the Tigers were up 2-1, and there was runners on like first and third, and Miguel Cabrera got one more at bat, and Aaron Boone intentionally walked him.
Oh.
And my wife said she thought that some of the Detroit fans were going to run onto the field and like tear him limb from limb. The
I'm
hatred,
sure.
the hatred coming. And then Austin Meadows blooped a single, and the Tigers ended up winning in part because of that cowardly move by Aaron Boone. But my stepson and I, we started chanting along, Yankees suck, Yankees suck. And it's still like kind of like, I love you. We can just say like, Yankees suck. All right, have a good night. Because it was a bonding moment that everybody except a Yankees fan, even a Yankees fan from Boston, can bond. It's like rooting for the house in blackjack, but that's okay.
Sure.
because you do great work at 32 Beat Writers, along with everybody you work with there. And it's football season, and it's time to be together, and it's time to have great memories and create new great memories. Always, we do it for you. We love you. We love serving you folks because you're so classy.